Hi and welcome back. So one of the most popular videos that I've done was around the change to building regs with Part L and whether it made any sense for me to invest in more insulation than even Part L was asking for. And I struggled through that video looking at what the return on investment would be, how much would that save in heating cost. We've put an air source heat pump in here, so obviously keen to get best from that. And how many years would it take to recover those costs, really, and lots of good feedback from you. And one of the things that I've discovered as we've gone through the build is the challenge of the performance gap, and that's the difference between the theoretical insulation value, the U value of the materials that you use, and what you actually get depending on how they're installed. And I think that's a real challenge for the building industry, because to achieve the higher and higher levels of insulation, the level of detail and finish that's going to be required is something that I don't think many of the building trade are used to. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but just from my experience looking at the guys that were working on my build, and I don't think it felt in any way they were doing anything wrong. It's the way they've installed insulation for many years. And that, when we're looking at PIR for our cold roofs on our vaulted ceilings that we've got in a couple of parts of this build, our build up was 100mm of Celotex PIR between the joists, a vapor control layer, then I think a 60 or 65mm of Celotex insulation backed on plasterboard to get to the U values that we wanted on our build. And the quality of fit of the insulation, it's cut by hand, it's not necessarily cut straight, the timbers are not necessarily cut straight, so the quality of that fit isn't always great. Now the tapes are jointed, but I think over time that tape will typically peel off and you're going to get air movement around, so you're not going to get the same levels of performance that you expected on the U value. And again, I've been looking at this, trying to understand how much difference does that make. I've still got insulation there, I've got some air movement, it's not going to be quite as effective, but is it 5%, 10%, 20%? I don't know. So I've been trying to look into that and how I could achieve a better quality of install. So some of the property I'm finishing myself, and I've done that vaulted ceiling recently and some of the walls for that. And for that I've used this product, which some of you may have heard of, which is Gapotape. So this is a great product that helps address that performance gap installing the insulation. So you cut the PIR slightly undersized, 8 or 10mm, and then you wrap a memory foam insulation around all of that that you've cut out, and then physically push that in. So it's a nice easy fit, but it retains a relatively airtight seal all the way around the edges, so you don't have that problem with a gap, and it will move over time. So as the timbers change through the seasons and with the age of the property, if they move apart, that seal will still be maintained. And it's a great solution. Obviously, other builders would look at potentially squirting foam in. Would that really go all the way through? If you think of the depth of this and you try and squirt foam in, you're only really going to cover a small part of it. Or they'd cut the PIR very tight and hammer it in and then tape it. So great product, but it's not inexpensive. So I think just my hallways probably cost me £250 in Gapotape on top of the Celotex insulation. So it's more time to install that, greater cost, and I've been trying to look at what's the difference, what am I really going to save or improve comfort of the property by making that additional investment. And we're trying to decide now whether we redo some or all of the main roof that had already been attempted. So we'll have a look at the installation there and how we think this would potentially improve things, but is it worth spending that additional money? So if we take a look at the installation that I've got in my vaulted ceiling, you can see this wasn't finished by the builder, and to be fair to them, it's been left uncovered for quite a few months now without support, so obviously some of it's moved around a little bit. You can see that they fitted these, it's not particularly tight, you can see that one there is moving around, the tape has peeled away. Other ones here where you can see I've got a gap big enough to get a few fingers in around that one. And then over at the side here, if I look at that, actually that's not 100mm of insulation, it's only 25 that's gone in there. To be fair to them, there's going to be insulated plasterboard on this face that would cover most of that, but this is a typical sort of quality of insulation that's gone on in the past, and it's okay, but the question is, what's the difference in the thermal performance going to be where I've got these gaps around there, and is it worth spending that extra money and expense and time on solutions like Gapotape to try and improve it? And obviously with Part L, one of the challenges is you do need to show that the insulation's been installed effectively, and I think I'd argue with this sort of insulation, it's not even a firm fit in that sort of location. So we're trying to decide, is it worth the effort of taking all this down? The good thing with Gapotape is we could probably reuse all of this existing insulation, because you cut the PIR slightly undersized, so it would really just be a case of trimming some of these down. We've also got a challenge at the edge of the ceiling over here, where because of our low pitch of the roof, the insulation isn't currently going to go far enough across to join up with the insulation in the walls. So we're looking at what options we've got to try and do something there. I spoke to Steve, who's got a great channel here on roofing that I've looked at, and he helped me look at a couple of options of what we can do there. Also took his advice on the warm roof I've got on the flat part of the building, where he describes tucking in, so joining the wall insulation with the ceiling insulation. I did that with PIR, and then used passive purple. You can see I've got a little bit of that around the windows here, to join up and try and make airtight the link between the insulation in the walls and the roof. So you can see there, I think the quality of insulation of the insulation in our build is typical. I don't think that's that different than I've seen from a lot of general building work. There are certainly some out there that go to a much higher level of detail. I'm sure many of you have watched channels like Robin Clevitt and the work that he's done, and the level of detail that he goes to. I particularly like what he's done on some of the builds that he's shown around spacing of the roof timbers, specifically to reduce wastage of the PIR insulation. It's expensive to buy, it's expensive to get rid of waste as well, as I found on this build. So one of the challenges I found in this build, as I've picked things up from other people, is one trade doesn't really seem to care or think about the trade that's following, and there are tiny bits of effort that would have taken a few minutes more at one stage could have saved a great deal of time later on. And I think for me, PIR is a good example of that. Very few of my roof joists are at the same spacing, so I'm having to measure and cut every individual one. That often results in wastage depending on the gaps in the size of your sheets, so all of that's a little bit frustrating. So I tried to look into this, spoke to somebody who's actually a SAP assessor. So he does all the SAP calculations for people doing self-builds and large renovations. I didn't actually have to go through that process, because although mine's a big project, it's actually classified as a renovation. But I certainly spoke to him around, what did I need to consider? Was it worth spending more on insulation, the things that I covered previously? And had a conversation with him trying to understand how big a deal is this performance gap. Is the insulation installed as I've got here a 5% difference? Does it justify the extra cost for materials for things like Gapotape and the time? It's going to push all of this higher level of accuracy and detail is going to push up construction costs considerably. I struggle to see if the industry is adapting quickly enough to do that. It was interesting, I actually had an interview with a graduate for his thesis on the Part L video that I did previously, looking at, do we think that Part L and other building regulations are actually improving the quality of the construction industry's finished product? I'm not personally convinced that it is, because I don't think building control at the moment come and look at the level of detail of finish that I'm talking about that would be required for the types of installation where we would use a product like Gapotape to get that very best performance. Hi, it's actually about 6 months since I recorded the first part of this video, and I was talking there around trying to understand the implications of correctly fitted installation Celotex in this example, in particular in the large vaulted ceiling that we have in the open plan room behind me. And I looked into that quite a bit further and used tools like ChatGPT that I used in my initial model to look at, was it worth spending more on insulation for my build, and dug further into this performance gap and looking at what the implications might be, and I was really quite surprised. So I gave the example to ChatGPT of 100mm of Celotex installed in a ceiling similar to this one. We've actually got above that spec, so I think I said we've got about 165mm of insulation in total. And I said, what's the theoretical performance of that? And that was a U value of about 0.22 watts per metre. Obviously we've exceeded that with the extra insulation that we've got here. So that's fully fitted with no air movement around it. And dug further into ChatGPT to find me examples of what were the implications if there were gaps, as I've shown you on that video. And it said that a 1 to 2mm gap around the edge of that PIR could produce the performance of it by as much as 30%. So just a small gap is quite a bit. And if you had a 10mm gap, which is pretty big, obviously, then that would potentially reduce the performance by 20%. So it's the equivalent of only just putting in 50mm of insulation, not 100. So pretty big impact potentially. And obviously on our build, we've got an air source heat pump. That's going to run better at lower flow temperatures and things like that. So all the advice that we had through this build was insulate, 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 add more insulation, try and get that all correct. And we're not a new build, it's a renovation for half of the build at least. So we want to try and get the very best. So as you can see now in the room behind me, we actually decided in the end to remove all of the Celotex that had been installed in the ceiling. It had been fitted with battens. When we started to look at it, we noticed the battens were actually slightly wider, 4 or 5mm wider than the timbers in the roof, and the Celotex had been cut for that narrower gap. So when we actually took some of the battens off that were holding it out, a lot of the Celotex actually fell out of the ceiling, so it wasn't fitted well at all. We then put all of that back in. I'll put a couple of photographs of the work we did, fitted all of that, so the 100mm Celotex with a Gapotape around that. That added about another £400 or so, I think, to the cost of putting that insulation in on top of the Celotex. So it's not inexpensive, but if I'm getting that 20 or 30% better performance, I'm not having to buy thicker insulation to achieve that. So I think it's probably justified. We also did a lot of work at the edges of the room to try and join up the insulation in the roof and tuck that into the top of the wall insulation as best as we possibly could, with a case there of cutting and shaping Celotex with battens to maintain the air gap above that. And then, as you can see in here now, we've got below that a 72.5mm, I think, or 75.5mm total board. So about 160mm of insulation with a vapour barrier installed, I think, as I mentioned earlier, in between those two. So we think it was worth the effort of doing all of that work here. Time will tell as we go into this winter and we see the actual energy performance of the building once the heating starts to come on in the next few weeks, but we're hoping that all works very well. But from the conversations that I had with people, as I said, talking to SAP assessors, my experience with the level of inspections that building control are doing, certainly on a renovation of this type of build, I don't think that we're generally seeing the level of attention to detail for insulation installation that we need to be, and it's definitely worth taking a look at that. I'd recommend you have a look at Steve the Roofer's channel and the work that he's done, particularly around installing warm roofs and how to do that correctly. He was very, very helpful to me. Other channels that I think I've called out before that have helped, people like Robin Clevitt and the work that he's done using both Gapotape and spacing his timbers to be more efficient in the use of insulation. Fantastic if you can get a tradesperson that's going to go to that level of detail for you. But my conclusion is it's absolutely worth spending that additional time and effort to install all of your insulation correctly. Try and get the build as airtight as possible. Obviously, we're not a passive house or anything like that here, but we're trying to do the best that we can to become airtight. And aware, obviously, we've got MVHR, so if I don't make it airtight, the MVHR system's potentially going to cause us more problems if we haven't done that. So again, that attention to detail is really important. So thanks again so much for your time. I hope you found this useful from the experience that we've had looking at which installation types we should install and absolutely how carefully it should be installed as part of that build as well. If you haven't clicked subscribe to follow my channel, please do so. I'd love to have any questions from you. And if you haven't, please click the like bell. We're approaching, I think, 700 or 750 subscribers now. And it's great to have some of the conversations I've had following up with a number of you on different things that we're doing here on the project. So thanks again so much for your time.